welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Will Hedrick.
And this is episode 51, where we are talking about a game about stopping rituals and shooting the gods, Cthulhu, Death May Die. And you can probably already tell that this episode is going to be just a little bit different because I am joined today not by Carter Mackey, but by Will Hedrick.
Good to be back.
Yeah, Will has been with us on the show for a couple of other episodes, so you probably recognize him from our Gentes review and from Star Realms Frontiers, which means that he has played and reviewed a Stomp of Approval game in the past.
Yeah, I have a theme of showing up when I get a new Kickstarter game that I'm really excited about. Then I guess I end up on the show. That's how this is working.
Yeah, it seems to coincide pretty nicely with when Carter happens to be out of town anyway, so that works out pretty well.
It's fortunate, yeah.
Carter's not with us this episode, sadly, because he has had a death in the family and needs to go be at home with his family, so we're very sorry to Carter and the rest of his family that he's not able to be here, but Will has graciously agreed to step onto the show and be with us, so thank you very much for doing that.
Absolutely.
And we are going to forgo the news this week because, frankly, there wasn't enough really interesting stuff out there for me to put together a news segment. Maybe next time, I guess it's just a dead couple of weeks. So we'll do that next time. And instead, before we get into the review, I'm going to mention to you that this episode, and really all of our episodes, are sponsored by Stone Valley Games. If you have not yet shopped at Stone Valley Games, you totally should, because do you want to buy things from a mega store online? No, absolutely not. Jeff Bezos has enough of your money already. Don't give him any more. Support your friendly local game store. Oh, you don't have a friendly local game store? Perfect. This is your friendly distant game store. You can shop at Stone Valley Games and get good prices, low prices on games, and find a community where you can discuss games with like-minded folks. One of the reasons we partnered with the fine folks at Stone Valley is that not only do they do a good job fulfilling orders and taking care of customers, but also they have an emphasis on solo games. So if you're looking for the next cool solo game for your collection, or for some of those hard-to-find Marvel Champions packs, I've got them.
Oh.
I've got them all, and they're so good, and you should get them too from Stone Valley Games. So visit them online at stonevalleygames.com. Many thanks to them for helping to make this show possible and for supporting what we do. And one more thing before we get to the review. Last week we mentioned that we would be doing a giveaway for two different games, Underwater Cities and Paladins of the West Kingdom. And so before we start our review and move on to the next thing, I want to go ahead and announce that the winner of the Paladins of the West Kingdom giveaway is Peter Walker. So congratulations, Peter. Thank you so much for entering, and thank you very much to Stone Valley Games for giving us the chance to do this contest. Their generosity is what made this possible. Check them out, stonevalleygames.com. All right, let's get into the review, which for this episode is Cthulhu, Death May Die. This is a game that comes to us from designers Eric Lang and Rob Davio, and from publisher Come On Games, not Simon Games anymore.
Does that hurt you to say that?
It really does every time, but they insist, so Come On Games. It came out in 2019 and plays 1 to 5 players. In Death May Die, you play investigators in the 1920s who, instead of trying to stop the coming of the Elder Gods, which is the focus of most of the games set in Lovecraft's mythos, you want to kill them outright after they make their way into our world. So by managing your descent into madness, you will gain special abilities, which, together with the items that you discover on your journey, will help you to disrupt the rituals that protect the gods that are invading the world, and give you an opening to put an end to them once and for all. As Lovecraft himself once wrote, with strange eons, even death may die.
Yeah, the pacing of this game feels very different than other Mythos games, just because the destruction is inevitable. You're coming in, you're already crazy, your ritual is so far underway it can't be stopped. Your goal is to disrupt it enough at a critical juncture where when that Elder God comes into the world, there's a window that they're vulnerable. And then you punch them in the face.
Yeah, and that's so wild that it's just very different than most of the games that we see that are set in this world. And most of the time, if you are fighting the Elder One, something else has gone very wrong.
Horribly
wrong. But here, you just need to expect it right from the beginning. So
in fact, you want to make it happen as soon as possible.
Yeah, which is just totally counterintuitive. Now, one thing that is nice about this game is that when you look at the components for the game, it looks very much like what you would expect from a Lovecraft game.
Oh, it looks better.
Yeah, except just turned up a notch, right?
Yeah, the sculpture and the art, Adrian Smith did the art, and he's the same guy that does a lot of others Come On projects. It's so nasty. It's so creepy. It's so good.
Yeah, there's so much that we could say here about components, but two things obviously stand out here. Miniatures are phenomenal.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Somehow, Come On keeps getting better with their sculpts. These are some of the best miniatures I think that they have ever done.
I think they are by far the best Mythos miniatures I've seen through any project.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. But I mean, consider the competition here.
Well, Cthulhu Wars has some pretty good ones.
Oh, that's true. Cthulhu Wars does have cool miniatures. I still think these are more interesting. They have way more detail.
Oh, I like them. Absolutely. But it blows Mansions out of the water.
Oh, yeah. Mansions, if you've listened to our Mansions of Madness review, you know I don't love the miniatures in that game, to put it mildly. I especially hate the bases for those miniatures, but the miniatures themselves they're muddy looking, they're not very pretty. Honestly, there's a part of me that wishes that I could just pilfer an extra copy of Cthulhu Death May Die for spare parts and just take all those miniatures and put them in Mansions.
Brandon's gotten a lot more picky about this since he started painting. He used to be able to ignore some of this, but he's doubled down on it now.
Well, yeah. I mean, now I look at the miniatures in the Mansions box and I'm like, wow, it'd be fun to play with painted miniatures. But these miniatures aren't worth painting. They look really bad. Yeah, this whole package looks phenomenal, but it's not just the miniatures. I mean, the artwork on everything, obviously, Adrian Smith artwork is amazing. The tokens and everything are good quality. The cards are great. The thing that, for me, puts this production over the top is the storage.
It's mind-blowingly good.
Oh, it's so good.
Well thought through.
Yeah, if you've not played this game yet, it's important to know that when you set up a game, you're picking a scenario that you want to play, and you pair it with an Elder God. So there are multiple Elder Gods to pick from, multiple scenarios to pick from.
In the core box, there's 2 Elder Gods and 6 scenarios. There's 2 more Elder Gods available as aftermarket, and then there's a whole nother 6 scenarios, I think, as season 2. So there's a ton of content out there. I don't want to do the math on how many possibilities that all adds up to. And then there's the Kickstarter content where that adds a whole nother Elder God and 3 more scenarios.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can pair any Elder God with any scenario. That's where the replay value is kind of off the chart.
So much replay value. Because anytime you set up the board, about half of the game's content comes from the scenario, and about half of what you're doing ends up being fighting the Elder God. And so it's a pretty good mix of mixing this and that to get something unique when you set the game up.
But one thing that kind of worried me when I first heard about this game is that, if you've got all these scenarios and you've got all these combinations, that means there's a lot of stuff to organize, right? Especially because each one of these scenarios has specific discovery cards.
They have their own tokens. I mean, there's pieces and chits and
that gets out of hand fast. And what they've done is they take all the stuff for one scenario. It fits in its own box, like a little tuck box.
Boxes in boxes.
All the stuff for the Elder Gods. Each Elder God gets its own box with all of its stuff in there. And, I mean, the setup for this game is a bear.
The setup is, for me, one of the worst parts of the game. It's not awful, but it's not fun.
But imagine how much worse it would be if they didn't have these boxes.
Oh, it would be unbearable.
Yeah. The setup is not great for this game. It does take a while. There's a lot of pieces to deal with, but this organization system makes it so much easier than it would be otherwise, and it makes it nice for packing the game away because everything just goes in its box, and then it goes in the big box.
Oh, yeah. And for people like Brandon that take all of their stuff out and then just chuck it in a box, and it's all willy-nilly in there.
I'm getting to the point where I can't handle that kind of take out the insert and just do baggies anymore.
See, that's how he's always done it. And thankfully, he's heading in a good direction. He's thrown away game components before, and it boggles my mind just because he didn't like how they looked in the box. But this box, it looks good when he's done putting it away.
Yes, and so I give the box a stomp of approval. You have to wait to see if the whole game gets one. But yeah, I really love the components for this game. It's a special production. I think Come On went above and beyond with this, and they should be really proud of what they managed to accomplish. They've also done a wonderful job with the rules.
It's not bloated. That's kind of how this whole game plays, is it's pretty clean. It's a pretty streamlined system, which Eric Lang, that's what he does really well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would buck against that a little bit because his game systems are kind of wild and messy thematically, right? So they don't always read as clean, and there are a lot of tokens and everything. But what's really remarkable is you break out this rule book, and it's 19 pages, I think.
And I think about half of that is pictures.
Yeah, it's very well laid out, beautiful, easy to understand. I really have no complaints with this whatsoever. It's just, I like the Fantasy Flight double rulebook system. I think that works well. But I do still prefer a single rulebook and to have it laid out well for both teaching and reference, which is not easy to pull off. But I think they managed to do it here.
I think so.
It also helps that as far as solo play is concerned for this game, there aren't really solo rules. You just play with two characters.
I think there's a paragraph that basically just says that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't have to deal with some of the other problems that we have with other games where we don't like how the solo rules fit in with the rest of it and whether all the setup instructions are included in the solo rules section or not. None of that's an issue here. I was very pleased with the rules. Did not find this game difficult to learn. I mean, I did have the added benefit of having Will teach me the game.
Well, there was that.
But when I went back through it to play it solo, didn't find it challenging. So excellent job with the rule book. And really, that attention to detail and care for how the rules of the game are presented bleeds into the play of the game as well, which is, I want to say stripped down, but I don't want to give the impression that this is a bare bones experience. Everything non-essential has been cut out of this game, is how it feels to me.
Yeah, and that's what I meant earlier by clean, that Eric Lang's thing is to just iterate on it until it is just the minimum it can be to be a great game. In my experience, there's somehow he pulls off this streamlining process that just really cleans off a lot of the sharp edges. And in this game, the sharp edges are gone.
I agree. I think when we talk about games and how they're designed and what makes a good game, sometimes I feel like conversations about whether a game's design is good or not revolve around a person's fascination with the mechanics that make up the game, right?
Yeah.
One of the things to me that's beautiful about Eric Lang games is that the mechanics are excellent. They're very well done. They're intriguing takes on old systems and mechanics that we've seen before.
That's the thing, is there's nothing groundbreaking in the systems in this game. Fundamentally, it's just a long push your luck experience with just great emergent storytelling.
Yes, and that to me is what makes it special, is that when I think about why I like this game, and I do like it, we'll get into how much in just a little bit, what makes this game special for me is that my mind doesn't immediately go to mechanics at all. It goes to the story that was told when I played this game, the emergent story, as you mentioned. The mechanics are there, but they disappear behind the theme, or they push the theme to the front in a way that is memorable and compelling for me. But that doesn't make a good review. So we will talk a little bit about the mechanics now. It's important to remember, again, that this is different from other Lovecraft games. This goes for pulp over investigation and deduction. And so one way that you can immediately tell that is that when you start a scenario, you know the god is going to break into the world and you will have to kill it no matter what. Now, how that happens, it differs from scenario to scenario, right?
Every single scenario controls that element. The scenario box will say what the board looks like, what your goals are in order to disrupt the ritual that's underway. And it'll also set half of the mythos deck, which is the bad stuff that the game throws against you. It's your epidemic cards from Pandemic. It's that deck of horrible things that's coming.
Yeah, but there are some constants.
Well, the Elder God sets up half that deck as well. So as you're flipping those cards, you don't know whether or not it's going to be something that's more focused on what the board has set up or what the Elder God is doing as they're trying to break onto that board. The game progresses through those mythos cards. As you flip them up, the vast majority of the deck, I think it's like 3/4 of the deck, will have a summoning sigil at the top. And so anytime you hit 3 summoning sigils, then the Elder God advances on this track. And once the Elder God advances to a certain point, they will hit the board. Or you can cause them to hit the board early if you accomplish the goals of the scenario and disrupt the ritual. If you don't beat the game fast enough, you will lose because you hit the end of that track. But how quickly the Elder God progresses down that track is tied to some luck with flipping the Mythos cards.
So the length of the game and how quickly the god will come into the world will vary from game to game.
A little bit. It's predominantly going to be very predictable, but some turns you may flip 5 Mythos cards before he comes out. Some stages you might flip 5 Mythos cards before he advances or she advances. Some stages you might flip 3 and then they're moving right along.
Yeah, so how the Elder God acts and when it comes into the game, all that will change from scenario to scenario and even from game to game within playing the same scenario again. But what is constant is that in every game, the being will come into the world and you will have to fight it. Disrupting the ritual doesn't stop that part of it. It just allows you to actually kill the Elder God.
Yeah, as the Elder God moves down that advancement track, that summoning track, if the ritual goes on long enough without you disrupting it, the Elder God just comes onto the board. The really bad part at that point is because you've drug your feet, they're on the board invulnerable. So they are really mucking up your plans. They're just stomping around and you can do nothing about it until you finish that ritual.
Yeah, and when that happens, and it has happened to me, it feels really bad and you feel really behind. Not in a way that makes me dislike the game's design or anything, but the game's not afraid to punish you either for not having gotten this done fast enough.
Absolutely. It's not an easy game by most people's standards. My win rates have been up above 50%, but I feel like I've had to work for those wins.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's in keeping with the Lovecraft mythos in general, right? I mean, Lovecraft games are always difficult. That's part of the theme.
Absolutely.
Overcoming insurmountable odds. But what makes this different is the pulp nature of it. So not just that you are going to kill the old one, which is very different, but also your characters are not fragile in the same way that they are in other games.
They have almost no health, and so if you get hit real hard real fast, you do feel fragile all of a sudden, but you have incredibly powerful abilities to make you feel like you're doing just crazy awesome stuff at the same time.
Yeah, and it's probably a good time now for us to talk about those abilities a little bit. So on every turn, what's going to happen is, first thing, you're going to get to take 3 actions with your character. And those actions are run, attack, rest, trade, or an episode action, which is listed on the episode or scenario card. It's basically something that allows you to beat that scenario, right? Or to
every
stem the
episode
tide.
has 2 actions that are unique to it. And like one episode we played, it was strap dynamite to a moose. One episode where everything was on fire, it was try to put out some fires so that you can actually move through this building that's burning down. It's always something specific to the environment.
I would like to go on record as saying that the strap dynamite to a moose action is the most compelling action in all of board games.
All of board games.
Yeah, so that's going to change up from game to game, or scenario to scenario, I should say. But, I mean, the rest of those are pretty standard stuff, right? Run, attack, rest. We've seen this in any number of other games. But the way that they are handled here is quite different from not just other Lovecraft games, but other games in general, I would say. Like movement, for instance. You get to move, 3 spaces with each move action, or 2 spaces?
Your normal movement is 3 spaces. There are skills that can make that better, but yeah, 3.
But what's interesting about movement is that the boards are pretty tight. There aren't that many spaces on a board, so you can move all the way across it in a few turns.
There's normally not a lot of decisions you can make in the paths you take to get from A to B. It's normally pretty straight shot.
But what makes movement interesting in this game, where in my opinion it is not in almost any other Lovecraft game I've ever played, is that when you move through a room where there is a monster, that monster is going to follow you when you leave the room.
It adds a layer of kind of tactics and gameplay depth to movement that a lot of times it just doesn't. Yeah, you don't. Normally movement seems like the thing you have to do to go do other stuff. sometimes in this game, movement accomplishes everything you want. I've never played another game where I actively had to peel for other players before, but in this game, there are definitely times where, Carter was about to get just leveled, and he's kind of playing more of a support character. I'm a tank. I run in there and just mad dash through his space, carry all the monsters with me, and now Carter's safe, and I'm in the thick of it. And so there's this tactical element to moving that feels good.
Yeah, it really does. I will say, though, that it does change the nature of this game from what I expected. And so I just think it's worth mentioning here that if you go into this game thinking that you're going to get an experience that's not dissimilar to like Descent or something, or any other cooperative game that's like move and hit things, right? I think you should know this game feels more puzzly than that. The movement makes this a much more puzzly game than I anticipated.
It still feels very dungeon crawly, and I don't feel like I'm solving puzzles like you talk about in Gloomhaven. But at the same time, there are a lot of places for you to make decisions, and if you make bad decisions too often, you're definitely gonna lose.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to say it, is there are a number of times that I've played this game when we arrive at a moment where we're like, okay, can you move along this path and take all of these monsters with you just to get them out of our hair for a minute? Like, because we need to do something in this room. Can somebody run them through a portal or whatever and transfer to them to the other side of the map? I don't want to overemphasize the puzzle thing because it's not a puzzle game, but it does take a part of, let's say, the Mansions of Madness experience that to me is just frustrating, that sometimes you spend your entire turn moving and it doesn't feel interesting or cool at all. And it does turn it into something that is not only crucial to win, but also I actually need to think through how I move and the implications of it.
It makes the choices for moving a lot more active and a lot less passive. You're not just trying to get from A to B, but you can actually accomplish a board state change by moving things.
Yeah. And one of the things that you're going to want to think through as you're taking your move action is how many monsters you're going to be bringing with you, or how many you'll be left in the room with at the end of your turn, because combat in this game can be quite punishing.
Yes, there's a couple of different things that can make it really tough. One of the things that I mentioned already is you don't have much health. You can take 5 hits before you're dead. And some of these monsters are swinging with at least 5 dice, especially the elder ones. But if you're up against a Chthonian, I mean, that thing's chucking 4 dice. That's a lot of your health pool that's potentially gone in one hit.
It is. One thing that I like about this game is that the monsters use the same combat system that you do. So it's not like you have to learn a whole new set of rules. The way combat works in this game is you need to look at your abilities and determine how many dice and of which color you're rolling. There are green dice and black dice. Then you roll the dice and you look at your results. And your results are going to include either automatic successes, blank sides, which are misses, elder signs, which are magic, basically, which you don't count as successes unless you have a certain skill, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then madness symbols.
Yeah, little madness tentacles, like madness is.
Yeah, so if they're swinging at you, if you roll successes, then great. That's, not great for you if they're swinging at you, but they're going to hit you and do a wound to you. The elder sign symbols, that depends. Whether they hit you or not depends on their abilities. The madness symbols are fascinating because whether you are attacking or being attacked, when you roll these madness symbols, you're going to move your little madness marker on the track on the top of your character sheet. And I guess what's really most fascinating to me about this game is that your progression in your abilities and how strong your character feels is directly tied to how mad you are.
And if you go too mad, you basically just die.
Yes, but you kind of want to go mad. Like, at least a little bit.
No, there's a line in the rulebook where it talks about being fueled by madness. It's, the game expects you to lean into the fact that you're cracked. There is something that has snapped in you, and that's part of what's giving you this power to press forward against these insurmountable odds.
Oh, it's so good. I want to backtrack just for a moment to say one thing that I do like about this combat system also is that you have, in addition to your wounds and your madness track, you have a stress track. And if you ever want to re-roll a die, you just move up on the stress track. And you're not going to die or anything whenever you are totally stressed out from re-rolling your dice. But you don't want to live completely stressed out, because there are some mythos events that would cause you to take stress. And if they do, and you're already stressed out, you take wounds instead.
In addition to the mythos events that can cause you wounds, a lot of the scenarios you're able to in all of the scenarios, you have the potential of drawing these discovery cards, which are oftentimes very powerful upgrades or things that you really need in order to make the scenario manageable. Most of those require you to spend a little stress in order to acquire the good part of that card. If you don't have enough stress left, there's oftentimes something really bad that happens to you. Instead of getting this good thing, you didn't manage your resources right and you end up punished for it.
Which I really love. I do love dice-based combat systems. I think the drama that they create is highly underrated among folks who've been playing games for a little while, and they get it in their minds that the best combat systems, or any kind of game system really, is a diceless one. I can't stress enough that people who think they want a totally diceless or luckless game often haven't thought through the consequences of that, which is you are gaining control but sacrificing drama.
And the other thing is, with diceless systems, they tend to put a tremendous amount of mental load on you that you don't always want.
No.
Sometimes you just want to roll a bucket of dice and see what happens and make some choices, but leave other things up to the hand of fate.
Yeah, I am somebody who does really enjoy diceless systems, so I don't want to hit that too hard, right? But I am saying...
But sometimes I don't have the brain space for it.
Exactly. And I'm an apologist for the dice-based combat system when it's done well. And here, because of this mitigation component with stress, and not just using that as a, hey, you get to re-roll dice and look for successes, but instead also using it to say, hey, you may want to re-roll this just to get rid of some of your madness that has come up, right?
Yeah, I think what Brandon's talking about here that we didn't really clearly say is that at any point in your turn that any dice are being rolled, you can use stress. So if you're attacking a monster, you can use stress to try to get more successes. Or at the end of your turn, when the monsters are attacking you, you can use stress to try to mitigate madness or damage or things like that they're doing to you. There's a lot of flexibility in how you use that stress.
But there's a resource management element to this that I really appreciate, which is like,
Absolutely.
I really need to hang on to this. Well, it's like resource management meets press your luck, right? Because there is a sense in which if you use up all your stress to re-roll dice for combat or to defend yourself or whatever, you are pressing your luck that the item that you get, if you get one that turn, isn't going to require you to spend this, or that the mythos
I'd
card
say
won't give you more.
about 2/3 of the deck asks for you to spend stress in order to get the good thing. But there's a third of the deck there that, you might not need that stress. I'm just going to, it's worth it to burn it.
That's so good. I love that. And tied to all of that, as we mentioned, is the madness, because at the beginning of the game, it's really beneficial for you to go at least a little bit more mad so that you can increase your abilities. But then as the game goes on, you're getting stronger and stronger. But when you're at your strongest is also when you're about to die, or to go just completely insane.
And I think this is one of those areas where the Elder God really matters, because different Elder Gods kind of require you to spend your resources and pace the game a little bit differently. If you're playing against Cthulhu, by the end of the game, every turn, not just each one of your turns, sanity is ticking away. Just Cthulhu's presence is slowly driving you mad. And so if you're in a 4-player game, that's a lot of sanity gone that you couldn't do anything about.
But the temptation to just worry about that later at the beginning of the game is so strong.
It is. But I think it is one of those things where if you're playing against Haster, the King in Yellow, you don't have that same guaranteed sanity ticking away at the end. And so this is one of those spots where I think the design does a really good job with its modularity of which Elder God you're playing against. You actually have to adapt your entire gameplay strategy throughout the whole session a little bit to manage the horrible things they're going to do to you.
Yeah, I think that is just absolutely fascinating. And even if that wasn't the case, that changes from Elder God to Elder God. The system is so good. It might be one of my favorite level up systems in any game, because what's going to happen is basically for every 4 madness at the beginning of the game, you're going to essentially level up. You're going to hit this point on your madness track where you're going to get to increase one of your character's abilities to the next level. And increasing your character's abilities makes a huge difference, because the way your character board is structured is there's this pool of like generic character abilities.
There are 6 generic character abilities, and every character has 2 of those 6. And then each character has one ability that only they have access to.
What's most fascinating about this to me is the generic abilities are just as tempting as your character's special abilities.
Absolutely. They're so good.
They are so powerful. So the generic abilities, first of all, you have Arcane Mastery.
And Arcane Mastery is the one that lets you take advantage of those Elder Sigils on the dice. So if you have that ability, then you get more successes than other characters.
But at the first level of it, you're getting to count one of those on your roll as a success.
Mm-hmm.
After you've leveled up a little bit, you can count multiple as successes.
You not just count multiples as successes, you can count each one as multiple successes. Instead of, at the beginning of that track, if you roll a bucket of dice and you hit 3 elder signs, that you get to count 1 success out of those 3. By the end of the track, that's 6 successes, because each elder sign is 2 successes, and you healed 3 stress.
It's wild. The sense of growth as a character in this game is crazy, and I really love that. So Arcane Mastery captures that well, but really, it's true for all the abilities.
All of them are that strong. Brawling just lets you completely go off the walls when it comes to melee combat. There's another one that gives you the ability to do ranged combat, which you don't normally have in this game, and it's super strong.
And toughness is one of the best abilities just for survival, because you get to re-roll dice.
Re-rolling is the first level of the ability. After that, you just start mitigating damage and sanity loss, which sanity loss can't be healed in this game. As you lose it, it's gone forever.
You can heal wounds, but the sanity thing just ticks away. All of that, I think, feels really great. What surprised me the most about these generic abilities is that the movement-based abilities end up feeling, to me, just as cool, especially in certain scenarios, as the combat ability. So like swiftness, for instance, allows you to move extra spaces when you are taking a move action. 4
instead of 3, and then very quickly you just start getting free movement actions, which kind of breaks the action economy in a game in a way that feels so good.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of that track, you're essentially getting 5 actions per turn instead of 3, which is, I mean, you can't overstate the power of that ability. And then the stealth action allows you to move through spaces without attracting the attention of monsters along the way. That movement puzzle that we mentioned at the beginning, where you take monsters with you, you take the first level of stealth, and suddenly you can ignore one of those monsters.
Yeah, if you have the first level, you ignore one. By the end, you can ignore all of them and shank them as you walk by. You just stab them for 1 wound just for walking past.
To me, making movement level up abilities feel powerful is an incredible design feat. Like, not only did you make base movement interesting, but you made me want to take level up powers in movement. Are you kidding me?
I avoided using some of those powers for my first half dozen or so playthroughs of the game. I did a bad thing. They're so good.
Yeah, they're so good. And then on top of that, all of the characters' special ability tracks are different from one another. So each character has a unique special ability that they can level up, and they're fascinating. Like, we have the Rasputin character card on the table right now, and this is actually a perfect example because it's so funny. Rasputin, like his historical personage, is unkillable. At the first level, you just get a free death.
If you run out of wounds, you just reset?
Yeah, because like Rasputin, it's just hard to kill, man. At the second level, you get an additional free death. So you could just send this guy into the fray and don't care if he takes hits or not. At the third level, when you return to life, you also heal all of your stress. And then at the final level, you have 3 total deaths that you can take, which is just wild.
And I think, Brandon, walking through that, I wanted to highlight something that I think is brilliant that I didn't notice at first with this level up system. The level 1 ability on each skill feels amazing, but you just get it for free. The level 2 ability is just game-breakingly good. As you move up that one space, the amount of advantage you get is massive. The level 3, a lot of times it's just not as good. It's good, it's nice, it's an upgrade. But the level 4, once again, you're just completely breaking the game. And so you have this great tension of, do I run up one track to try to get to that game-breaking level 4 ability? Or do I bump another track up to level 2 because that also feels like I'm breaking the game?
Which is something that's in Blood Rage to a certain extent. So like I'm thinking of if you increase one of your 3 stats in Blood Rage, eventually you get to a point where you start getting points for having increased your stat up high enough, right?
Right.
But you reach this point toward the end of the track where you're getting 10 points at the end of the game. Then if you increase it again, you're still only getting 10 points. But if you increase it one more time after that, you're getting 20. But this is even better than that because that kind of progression system is used in a lot of Euro games, really.
Right.
But what those games sometimes forget to do, and what Blood Rage didn't do that I kind of wish it had, in this game you still get a little benefit, right? Like moving to level 3 is not nothing.
No, it's oftentimes something that is really nice, but you don't feel like you're breaking the game.
No.
It's nice. You feel good for having gotten it.
To me, the difference is the difference between Agricola and Caverna. There's one is scraping by, one is an embarrassment of riches.
Exactly.
And that's what this is. I would be hard-pressed to think of a game that does growth and leveling up better than this one, for my taste.
The other thing about the leveling up system is you never get to have it all. You don't have enough upgrade points even at the very end of your track, to take all of the skills to max level. You have to make choices.
But what I also love is that is counterbalanced. This whole level up system is counterbalanced by the fact that as you are hitting these points when you level up, you're also running into a problem where at the beginning of the game, you get these cards,
pathology cards
that are basically just like a special madness that you have that's going to come into play whenever you level up. I have mixed feelings about these, but one thing is for sure. If you don't plan ahead, even though leveling up is cool, you will pay for leveling up. So, for instance, you could be a pyromaniac for one game, and you're going to put a fire token in your space whenever you hit that next point where you would level up. And then you'll deal wounds equal to the number of fire tokens in your space to all other figures there. Which means that if you time it right, you can do that just to enemies.
Oh, yeah.
But if you don't, you can really hose your team.
You're setting your teammates on fire.
And this one is a good example of a card that I really like because you can manage it well.
All of these, at their best, feel like a double-edged sword. If you do it right, you can use it to your advantage. But if you get the timing wrong, if you mishandle it, it will hurt you.
And I love that. I do like that you do have a cost to count in addition to just how mad you're going, or like the rate at which you're going mad.
There are a few of these that instead of it feeling like a double-edged sword where you can use it really well or really poorly, some of them just feel like they can go really south. You can mitigate that and nothing bad really happens, which doesn't feel as good. And because these cards are randomized, I'm guessing this is where Brandon was picking up on. He's mixed on these.
Yeah, this is where I'm mixed because if you, let's say you're playing a solo game, and in a solo game, you're playing 2 characters. If you get 2 of these pathology cards for your 2 characters that are easy to mitigate and potentially do a lot of damage to enemies, then great. You're going to have a much easier time that game than if you happen to get 2 cards that are, one is really good and one's really bad, or God forbid, 2 of the cards that are just really bad for you with no redeeming qualities.
Yeah, the one of them that I think is the toughest one to play with in the game is you literally repeat a Mythos card, which the Mythos cards are all very bad. And the only advantage you get if you time it right, you don't repeat that Mythos card. There's no using that against the enemies. It's just, I didn't hose myself and my entire team.
Yeah, that does not feel great to me. I'm not really crazy about that. I wish all of the pathologies were like Pyromania, where, timing, not just when you level up, but where you are when you level up, I wish that they all had that element where it could go really bad for you or go really well.
Unfortunately, most of them do. It's one of those things that I think there's 2 or 3 out of a deck of 12 or 15 cards that just don't feel as good to use.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I do like the double-edged sword of these because the rest of the game and the rest of your turn is not much of a double-edged anything. It's just bad. So after you've taken your actions, you are going to have to draw a Mythos card. And like you said, those are all bad.
Just real bad.
But also, some of them have those sigils that you mentioned, which are going to advance the Elder God track. And so the game gets closer to ending. You need to finish the ritual in time. You have all of that pressure. But on top of that, often those cards will move enemies closer to you or closer to an investigator on the board or to some other point on the board. And this is where I have another problem with this game. If at the end of this Mythos card phase, you are alone in a room, or not alone, but there aren't monsters in your room, you get to draw a card, which I think is called a discovery card.
Yes.
And these are, I don't want to say items, because sometimes they're like allies or other people that
they're
you run
generally
into.
either items or allies, yeah.
And they are super helpful. You're going to want to have some of these over the course of the game.
There's some scenarios that you just can't win the scenario unless you get some helpful discovery cards.
But unfortunately, those Mythos cards, I mean, I can go through the trouble on my turn of making sure that my space is empty and that I'm in a spot where there aren't really that many monsters around me. And then I just happen to draw a Mythos card that moves monsters into my space. And then I don't get to get one of these discovery cards.
I guess that didn't bother me as much as it bothers you. It's one of those things that, yeah, you plan for the best and expect the worst is...
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's the Mythos.
I mean, it is, except that there was my first game of this that we played. It seemed to happen every turn. Like every turn, I kept working so hard to get myself into a place where I could get one of these cards. And then just by random chance, a monster happens to move into my space.
You did have really bad luck with that game. Yeah. That's true.
And it sometimes feels bad because you know that these cards are in there and that they're cool. And they're not just cool, they're like thematic and interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Know?
Yeah, they all have a little bit of flavor text and say some, 1920s noir stuff.
And they actually they face you with a choice too. I mean, sometimes the choice is obvious, like, do you want a bad thing or do you want a good thing? Right? I mean, okay, I'll take a good thing, I guess.
You do have to have the resources for the good thing, but yeah.
Yeah, but other times there is a choice between two really genuinely good things. So I like that whole experience of drawing them. I just hate that you can work to get to a place where you can draw them and still get a foil by random chance. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's just it's a nitpick that I have with the game.
Like I said, didn't bother me. To me, it's just part of the pacing of the game.
But really, that's all the game is. You're just taking actions on your turn, drawing a Mythos card, checking to see if you're alone at the end of that, and drawing a discovery card. Or if you're not alone, the monsters are going to attack you. And then you repeat that over and over until either you die, and if you die before the Elder God comes onto the board, then everybody loses the game.
Game's over. Early loss.
If the Elder God has already come onto the board and you die, the game still continues without you, and you just get to sit at the table and talk with your friends. And that does sound bad because I don't like player elimination in games. But if you're dead, chances are pretty good there's not much game left.
There's not going to be a whole lot of game left. And the other thing, we were talking about how dice rolling can add drama. Sometimes in this game, you just have to decide, I'm going to die now, and I'm going to take them down with me. It feels like you are making a real choice to do this noble action to try to save the world, but you're going down for it.
You nailed it. That, to me, this last game that we played, we didn't end up having anybody die, but it felt like we were going to have to send somebody in and just let them die so that the world could be saved.
The last game I played solo, I had to sacrifice one of my characters to just this insane maneuver to try to stick some damage and change the board state so that my other character had half a chance at winning. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I liked this character. I wanted them to keep playing, but they had to make this just buck wild maneuver and sacrifice themselves.
Yeah, and of course, all that player elimination thing is entirely mitigated in the solo experience, right?
Oh, yeah, that's just a plus right there, right. Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. I do think it's smart. If you've got a player that dies before the monster even comes out, it's smart to go ahead and make that a lose condition because you're not going to win anyway.
You're not going to win. And like you said, the game could go on for a while if somebody dies early. But if the Elder God's already out, the game's end state.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a positive here. And that really gets us through how the game plays and what that's like. So I think we're going to move into the end stage of the review here where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. I'm just going to start by saying this game is beautiful. It is atmospheric and thematic, and it just feels different than any other Cthulhu game out there.
I completely agree. The way it handles the mythos, I feel like it does a good job of using the fun parts of that source material. But it also, because it's so pulpy, I feel like the source material isn't as oppressive. When I win a game of Mansions and everything is still awful and wrong, even though I won, it feels bad.
Yeah, I get that. I love Mansions so much, but I understand that. There's something different about this game. It gives you more control over your destiny than a game like Mansions gives you, for sure.
And when I win a game of this, I always take a little picture of my character standing on top of a dead older one, and it feels so good. I never feel like, well, I did everything I could, but everything still went wrong. The pulpiness kind of tempers that oppressive nature of the mythos.
Yeah, I think that's well said. On top of that, the best progression system that I have played with. I love the character progression system, the double-edged nature of it, the fact that you have to manage the rate at which you go mad, how much more powerful you get when you increase in your abilities. Love all of that.
I completely agree. I also think it's really good the way the game handles such a simple mechanic like press your luck and turns it into something so much bigger and grander. You have the ability to do luck mitigation, but at its core, this game just relies on this simple mechanic and turns it into something fantastic. Yeah,
I completely agree. I mean, the luck mitigation in this game is handled well. That mixed with the progression, mixed with the double-edged nature of the leveling up and how beautiful it is, and the replayability where you match up a scenario and a god together.
There's a ton of replayability in that core box.
Just that modular nature of the game itself and how you set up the game. It feels fresh and different and interesting, and I love all of that stuff. One more small note that I'll add here that we didn't really discuss is the characters themselves and how wild and outlandish they are.
Oh, that is true. It's just so good. There's a nun, and in one hand she has a sawed-off shotgun, and in the other hand she has a Bowie knife. I mean, it's just this huge, that's not a knife, this is a knife. And she's dressed in her habit and just looks twitchy.
Yes.
It was so good.
All the characters have so much flavor. Like Rasputin, obviously, is a fantastic addition to the game. All of them are so cool. There's a bunch of them in the core box. And maybe that's one more thing I would say about this is I understand that a lot of people have negative feelings about Command games, especially related to Kickstarter exclusives and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of Kickstarter exclusives for this game.
If you have the Kickstarter version of this game, you have 28 playable characters without any of the other expansion content.
Yeah, that's without Season 2. I mean,
that's another 10 characters if you have Season 2.
Now, that said, if you get this game at retail, there's still a pile of characters in that core box.
Yeah, there's 10 characters in the core box, and they all add to the replayability of the game in a meaningful way because that third skill you have is powerful. Playing that character is the only way to access that skill.
Yeah, and I would also say, too, that even though there is a Kickstarter exclusive Elder God, which is Dagon, it's the least interesting one of the bunch.
My problem with Dagon is that it encourages a play pattern that isn't necessarily the most fun. It's a good Elder God, but you slowly turn into fish people, and once you're a fish people, then your only real choice is to just go crazy and get yourself killed, because if you ever end up with too many fish people, then the investigators just instantly lose. So it encourages this play pattern where, yes, sometimes it's awesome to make that heroic choice and sacrifice yourself. It's not awesome to have to make that choice.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And I guess the takeaway here is if you buy this at retail, I think you are getting a lot of value in the core box and a lot of replayability, and that it's not worth worrying about what you missed in the Kickstarter. I did not back this on Kickstarter. Yeah, and you did. So that's why we are playing with a Kickstarter edition. But when I played this for review, and as we put together this review, we tried to think about the experience in the core box that you can get at retail. And so it's really good.
It's really good.
So all of that is good for this game. There are a few things that are bad, I would say. The first thing and the most important one, and I almost put this under ugly, is that it's a bear to set up.
It's a tile-based board. Tile-based boards, there's always extra setup. This one feels worse than some other tile-based boards to set up because you're dealing with that thing where you got to hunt down tile 7B and then flip it to the right side and then orient it the correct way. And it all turns into something a lot longer than you wish it was.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is definitely, in addition to that, there are a lot of tokens. There are a lot of pieces to this game. I mean, you just need to know going into it that there's a lot of flavor and cool stuff here, but to make that happen, there's a lot of stuff in the box.
If we're playing this at a game night, I'd try to show up 20 minutes or a half an hour early just to set up the game.
Yeah, and you've got to know then that if you're setting this up for solo play, that's just something you have to take into account. And, not everybody's going to be up for a half hour of setup before they play, and you just got to know that going in. And actually, that's the one other thing I'm going to say about this is that I played this now both multiplayer and solo, and I think the solo game is a lot of fun. Playing with two characters is not that difficult because it's not a difficult game that has a ton of moving parts. So it's not like you have a lot to manage, but you do not have that very strong connection to a single character that you have in a multiplayer game. Like you're managing two characters.
And for me, I guess it's just the way my brain handles it. This wasn't a bad thing for me because I always, whenever I end up two characters, two-handed like this, one of them is me and the other one is my sidekick. And it's just the way my brain does it. Yeah. I always just attach myself to one of those two and the other one's around.
It's not a deal breaker, right? Because you have to do it in Mansions of Madness. You have to do it in a lot of these kind of games. And I think reframing it that way in your brain is definitely helpful. For me, I always would prefer it if I could only play with one character. I mean, but then again, you would lose a lot in this game if you did that because it's the relationship between the two characters on the board. And
I don't think mechanically you could play it with one character. And I think it's good that they said solo rules are just play two characters.
Yeah. I would also say that having played this multiplayer, there's so much emergent fun and story that happens around the table with other people that you lose in the solo experience. And so just for comparison's sake here, I'm going to say that playing multiplayer, I like Death May Die more than Mansions of Madness. And if you listen to my top 10, you know that Mansions of Madness is my number 2 solo game. I love it, love it, love it. But I think it does get a little bogged down with the puzzles and stuff in multiplayer, and I would prefer to play this multiplayer. I still prefer to play Mansions of Madness solo because so much of the atmosphere and the story and all that comes from the app, right? It's not stuff that comes out around the table as you're playing, although there is that too. But you can have a fuller experience playing solo than you can with this, I think. Death May Die has given me some of the most memorable dramatic moments that I have had playing a board game, but they're more memorable and dramatic when you're playing with other people in a way that I don't think is as true with Mansions of Madness.
That's super true. So many games I've played have come down to one turn, one way or the other in this game, and it is just better to share that with a friend.
Yeah, it is. It's rare for me that I feel that way about solo-friendly games. I've gotten to the point now where I'm pretty content to play it a game solo, and just if I get to play it multiplayer, then that's icing on top. I think that if I owned this game, and I'm not going to because Will has it and he lives like 15 minutes away, I probably would very rarely play this game solo because of how much more fun I have playing it multiplayer.
And I'm not a solo gamer. On other times I've been on the podcast, we've addressed that, and that's kind of why I stand in for Carter sometimes is I love board games. And so sometimes I end up playing them solo because nobody else is around. I'm in a hotel somewhere or, everybody else is off doing something else. But normally my solo stuff is video games. This is one of the ones that if I was alone and didn't have access to the internet, I would absolutely play this solo.
Yeah, I see. I guess I still would play it solo, but if I had this and Mansions on my shelf and I'm looking for a solo game, I will always pick Mansions over this. If I'm playing multiplayer, I will almost always pick this over Mansions.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so for me, it does lose something in the solo play. I didn't really expect, I guess, going into this. I just enjoyed it much more multiplayer than I thought I would. That's all for me that's bad.
I do have one or two things that I think tip over into ugly for me. And the big one for me is the way mental illness is handled in this game is appropriate for the mythos. But if it's something that you're sensitive to, it could be a really ugly thing. One of the pathology cards is obsessive compulsive disorder. I have friends with obsessive compulsive disorder, and so I don't know how they would react to that being on the board game table in front of them. I don't think that that's so much a flaw of the game design, but I think it is something that you have to be fine with playing a game that's set in the mythos.
It does feel a little insensitive at times to present a pulpy take on mental illness.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. But you've got to understand too that they're trying to be true to how Lovecraft portrayed mental illness in his writings,
and
right?
So I'm of two minds on this, but I still think it needs to show up in the ugly category for me, because if it's someone who that would offend, then it's ugly. If everyone playing the game is not offended by that, then you're just dealing with the contents of the world you're working in really well.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I will say that I don't think this will be a big deal for most people, but this is one of those things that we just want to mention to put it out there because it will be a big deal for some.
Yes.
Right? And so it's just something to consider. I'm going to add to the ugly category the fact that the pathology combos can sometimes make you feel quite a bit more hampered in some games than others, just depending on which random ones you happen to be dealt.
It's true, and it doesn't feel like it would work well to draft those or be dealt two and pick one. It just doesn't. It feels like they need to be random in order for everything to kind of play out, but at the same time, sometimes you get handed a bum hand.
Yeah, I mean, thematically, drafting your mental illness as opposed to being dealt one randomly, I mean, that doesn't really work, right? That it needs to be dealt randomly. But yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work out that well for you. And I don't know. I like the ones that are double-edged. I think those were excellent. But the other ones...
And I think the reason that's legitimate as an ugly, because that actually changes the difficulty of the game in a way that you can't prepare for until that card flip.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, in a similar vein, I would also put in the ugly category the fact that the game rules do not prepare you for how dramatically the difficulty can change for certain scenarios depending on which elder god you pair them with.
Yeah, I think that's a lot worse in the Kickstarter exclusive stuff, which is one of the reasons I'm glad that they kept that stuff for Kickstarter exclusive, because some of that stuff just doesn't feel as polished, doesn't feel as balanced because of the sorts of interactions you're pointing out. Yeah. The last thing that I put this here halfway as a joke, but the last thing I'd throw in as ugly is because the Kickstarter comes with these really nice plastic player board organizers that keep your tokens and everything from getting knocked around, but the retail doesn't, to me that's ugly. The fact that they exist and not everyone has access to them, that's the only thing that makes that feel ugly to me, because this is one of those games where if you start bumping stuff, there's not a ton of stuff on your board that can get bumped, but it's all moving around in a way that if it does get bumped, it's gotta be real aggravating.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, the good news is that with Etsy being what it is nowadays, that somebody almost certainly already has created one.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that, yeah, but it's one of those things, just because they exist, but not everybody gets them, oh man, there's just something wrong about that.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree with that. Those are really nice, but you're not going to get them in the retail edition.
Yeah,
of the game.
You're going to have to hit Etsy for that.
But that's all I've got for the ugly category. And so I think it's time for us to decide whether this is a game that gets the stamp of approval. And if you're new to the podcast, you should know that the stamp of approval is something that we give out pretty rarely. This is a game that we only give out to games that both of us love and that we would recommend buying even if you only ever played it solo. Where are you going to land on that, Will?
It's one of those things where I really love playing this game. The love factor is absolutely there. Because I'm not a solo gamer, I kind of make a lot of the rest of those decisions based on the fact that, like, okay, I bothered to play this game. Would I play it again? And the answer there is yes. So I think I would stomp it.
I think that I'm going to reluctantly say that I would not stomp the game. And here's why. I think it's important to know going into this that Will did love the look of this game and kickstarted it because he loved the look of it from the beginning.
Well, it was just the fact that Eric Lang and Rob Davio made a game together. And if that happened, I wanted it. They're both so good.
And it lived up to your expectations.
Oh, it exceeded them. It's better than I wanted it to be.
And it's worth saying here that for me, I looked at this game initially and was not really very interested in it at all for a number of reasons. But I just didn't think that I would be interested in another Lovecraft game also. I mean, just to be frank, I've already got one that I love and I wasn't drawn to it. Having played it, I can say that for a multiplayer experience, I love this game. Like, love it. Want to play it all the time. Like it way more than I anticipated. But this is maybe the first time this has happened on the show. I can't really remember. But this is one of those games that even though a lot of people are interested in how it would play solo, I'm going to have to say that for me, it just loses too much in the transition to solo play as far as like drama and excitement and all of that I can't recommend it just for solo play. Now, I will say this. For a lot of people, that's not going to matter. For a lot of people, they are going to love the experience of playing this solo. The fact that it's just a little bit more puzzly than a lot of other dungeon crawl style games. All the good things that it has going for it are going to outweigh what I'm saying about the solo experience. But for me, if I owned this, I think I would almost exclusively play it multiplayer, which is a very rare thing for me. So I'm going to withhold the stomp, and I'm really torn about it, to be honest, because of how much I love this game and its systems. So here's what I say to you. If you hear what I'm saying about solo play, and you think it sounds like my problems with it sound kind of vague and nebulous, that's because they are. And I'm basically just saying my experiences with it weren't as memorable as playing multiplayer. And if you hear that and you think, I don't think that would be a problem, by all means, go get this game because it's amazing and different and interesting and fun. If you are worried that it will lose a lot for you, then you're probably right. If you think that you will have plenty of opportunities to play this multiplayer and may only sometimes want to play it solo, go for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're not going to stomp this game, but with a lot of qualifications, I guess is what I'm saying, because it's an excellent, excellent design. Just for me, it takes a step back as far as the solo experience is concerned.
And that's why you're the solo gamer.
That's all we've got for this episode, folks. Oh, and one more thing before we finish. Let's go ahead and announce the second winner for the 2 giveaways that we were doing this last week. We have already announced the West Kingdom winner, but we are going to go ahead and announce now that the winner of the Underwater Cities giveaway is Scott Buckner. So congratulations, Scott. You are going to get yourself a copy of Underwater Cities, and thank you very much again to Stone Valley Games for making this possible. Please, 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 if you haven't already, check them out at stonevalleygames.com. All right. If you have not yet checked out the other shows in the Dice Tower Network, you should. We are a member of the Dice Tower Network, and there are a lot of other great board game podcasts out there that will help fill your podcast feed with board gaming goodness. You can go to dicetower.com to learn more about all of those. If you haven't yet followed us on Facebook or Instagram, you totally should, because we do announce giveaways on there regularly. We post incredibly interesting content on there. Not really, it's mostly unboxing pictures and gameplay pictures, but it's still fun, all right? Follow us and talk to the other people who listen to this show. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. If you have not yet gotten a micro badge for this show, you can get one on Board Game Geek. We have a cool little yellow and purple dinosaur that you can purchase for 8 Geek Gold. Or if you don't have much Geek Gold, send me a message, and I'm more than happy to spot you the gold that you need to get that and add it to your profile. And that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, my name is Brandon Waite.
And my name's Will Hedrick.
And this is Solosaurus.